I think I just got a green light, which we heard earlier today means to anybody in IT, just go ahead. It's all good. Welcome. We're really glad that you're here today. Hello to everybody who's on Zoom. I'm going to be talking a little tiny bit at the beginning of this, and then we're going to hand it over to this wonderful crew here who's going to do the majority of the storytelling for the day. So this is Art of Adaptation, Real Stories of Navigating Through Change. And this is a panel that we ran back in October and got some really great response from it. And people said, it would be really great if you could do this again. Would you mind bringing it to this conference? And so here we are with nearly the same crew again, which is pretty impressive. And we're really glad to be able to bring this to you today. So who's we? The information technology leadership. Oh, how do we advance a slide? No. Woo. Here we go?
Yeah.
Hey, I did it. I don't actually know which one of the things I hit worked, but we're going to go with it. So we are the Information Technology Leadership Development Committee. What you'll see here says a little bit about what things normally are and what this year has been. So normally what this committee does is it's a group of people on campus who have been through one of the more leadership training programs and have joined this group to help enable other people to do the same. We put together cohorts, we facilitate things for those cohorts and sometimes for some of the alumni. This has not been a normal year. Along with a lot of other things, this group lost funding this past year. And so we pivoted this year and we've been doing a lot of things on campus, about 2 a quarter, to try and bring people together, both people who have been through the trainings and people who haven't and are just interested in leadership topics and interested in thinking about how we all work together. Next year, fingers crossed, still waiting for news, stay tuned. You can learn more at our website. Hopefully there's going to be information there. And we're going to be able to say all kinds of exciting things about being able to do more training again next year, but we'll see. Thank you. All right. So about today's panel, change is not going anywhere. So what are we going to do with that? How do we actually handle when things are changing? Wait a minute, things are changing all the time. They're changing constantly. And we hear a lot of things about their processes to do change better. But how do we actually do change so that it feels better? How do we recognize the state that we are essentially all in together all the time? So we're bringing together this panel of folks today, and I'm going to let them all briefly introduce themselves before we launch into the panel questions. Chris here is going to be our moderator for the panel. We should introduce ourselves. Hi, I'm Elizabeth Simcock, an associate director in Do It, where I lead the web platforms and services team.
And I'm Chris Lass, he, him. I work for Do It as well in the product management team, focused on software licensing in the campus software library.
All right. We're going to let the panel briefly introduce themselves, and then we're going to get into the real stories.
I'm Brian Lynn. I'm the infrastructure services lead for the Center for High Throughput Computing.
Hi, I'm Phyllis Trigg, and I just left a position at UC Santa Cruz as an associate vice chancellor for experience strategy and design, and I'll be incoming to a role here at the UW as a shared capabilities director for West. So happy to be back. Applause. Hi, I'm Sabrina Messer. I am currently an administrative initiatives lead in a department called Administration, Innovation, and Planning. I have about a 16-year career between help desk and program and project management.
My name is Dan Jacobson. I own a small retail store, which is why I'm here doing IT stuff.
And I'm Stefan Way. I work for the University of Illinois System as their HIPAA privacy and security director.
Hi, I'm still Chris. So, again, thank you very much to the panel for coming and participating with us again. Like Elizabeth said, change is constant. And in our university environment, change is often a 5-letter word as opposed to a 4-letter word, but same sort of connotation. With this group here, we've got a few questions that we wanted to kind of start the conversations, but we also want this to be a little bit organic. So if there are things that come up that we want to have addressed, we want to make sure that we're giving those sorts of opportunities too. We do have a limited time frame, so I'm going to get right to it. So panel, to you, Looking at change, can you share a time when a change initiative didn't unfold as expected and what you took away from that experience? Who would like to go?
I guess I'll jump in because mine's was a recent failure, I guess. And kind of an ironic one. So just so those who don't know me in the room, I used to be on campus for about 20 some years in a variety of cybersecurity roles. But this example is actually from my time at University of Illinois. We were rolling out a new, we were replacing our process we use for our annual HIPAA training, which was a really easy 15-minute through the slides, compliance checklist, boring type training. And I wanted to change it up where people were getting a little more information. It was more related to using PHI or protect health information in the higher ed sector. Those sorts of things. Turns out, one, it wasn't the training itself wasn't accessible, so that delayed it. Second is the LMS we moved it to went through an upgrade they didn't know they were going up through while we were doing it, delayed our training even further. The training, which was supposed to take an hour, up to an hour, was taking people an hour and a half. They were getting blockers. So just a mess, something I did not want to be associated with at all. And I was remembering my time here, unfortunately, of boy, if this was cybersecurity training for campus at UW, I probably wouldn't have a job anymore. It was that bad. But what I did is I took ownership of it. I talked about what we would do to remediate the issues. People were very kind, actually, in their responses for the most part. I listened to people, I acknowledged what they said, and I'm carrying that forward as we release this year's training.
I'm also going to talk about University of Illinois. So I was the CIO for the School of Education and the head of Merritt Library for a number of years. And prior to that, I was in various director positions at what was then CITES, which is, I'm sure, no more, but basically do it for University of Illinois. And one of the director positions I had was for customer service. And during that time, we were going to roll out a new ticketing system, which always goes perfectly. And the thing that was frustrating for me in terms of the change management was that we developed an entire process to go out on campus, try to interview as many people as possible, have discussions, be inclusive for needs, et cetera, so that it could be a universal ticketing system for departments and for central IT. And then we got the consultant on campus who was military and government was his background. So we assumed that everything would be fine. Got in the room with him with all of our various needs and requirements, et cetera, and learned that he had only ever done installations on military bases. And so he was shocked and surprised when we had competing requirements. And that kind of, I'll just say that started an entire new process of discovery with that company and really led to some challenging times in terms of that transition.
I think we're going. Hello. Since we're going down the line, I am not speaking about anything in Illinois. My example is I was part of a department that was created independently to look at operating model changes. It's kind of in the air right now. We're looking between all the different functional areas of campus. How do we maybe structure our service delivery different? So at this time, it was a separate department that was created to look at operating models, but also to bring continuous improvement in the culture and kind of in the air, in the lifeblood of our community.
And great idea. That was sort of what I've learned from it. It was that there's right ideas, but at wrong times. And so we were trying to do this work, however, was also alongside Workday being launched, which was very disruptive in good and bad ways across campus. And so ultimately, it did not go well in that department. It was no longer, the services were no longer needed from that department. But again, the ideas were good ideas, and other areas of campus closer to where those services are being delivered, those are the areas examining those same questions now. So I just can't emphasize that enough. Sometimes it's still a really good idea, but at the wrong time and the wrong people.
Yeah, so maybe 8 years ago. So actually, to provide some background, the CHTC is mostly federally grant funded. So originally, a combination of like DOE and NSF funding, but now mainly NSF. So every 5 or so years, we are changing big funding streams and changing projects, changing who we collaborate with. We collaborate with a lot of people across the country because we support national cyber infrastructure for the NSF. And so about 8 years ago, one of the grants ended, and then one of our big collaborators at Indiana University were suddenly not going to be working with us anymore. And they ran our operations center. And we had a 2-month timeline, and my team had to move a bunch of services here, 10 or so, of a lot of kind of custom organically grown stuff. And so we made this transition, we hit the deadlines, things didn't blow up. So there was a success there, but we're still paying down some of the technical debt because of the decisions that we made under duress during that time. And so if we had a longer lead time, more time for planning instead of doing, I think that would have saved us a lot of hours now.
Thank you. So something kind of stuck in my head from what Stefan said with the communication about the opportunity for growth as opposed to failure that you had. We hear a lot across campus about telling the story, making the narrative make sense to all stakeholders, that sort of a thing. What role does storytelling play in driving home change in your worlds, but also what can we take from that from the public sector university? Yeah, sorry, I called you out, Stefan.
Okay. I think what I would start with is kind of some of you've heard me talk about this in the past, so it's going to sound familiar. So sorry to repeat this, but there's a change model I follow, and one is the 3 vectors of change comes from helping people be motivated and make the change. Second vector is giving them the tools and knowledge to be successful with that change. And the third vector is about either being accountable to that change as well as celebrating the successes of that change. So those are the 3 things. And nice sense, it shouldn't just limit on the success, but the path, successes of the path along the way of that change. On the importance of storytelling is the first and third pillar, which is telling the stories that help motivate people so they can understand why they need to make the change, and then showing the success of being along that path to make that change. So what was the outcome? So this is a very oversimplistic example, is that we made a change to how benefits one year were being released to how many employees were across UW system, like 80,000 or something. Yeah. So, it was press a button and go. And the person reporting to me didn't see the value in his job. I said, well, wait a minute. You just found a way to simplify how people could access their benefits and apply for them in a way that was simplified. You can take that with a grain of salt, as you guys all have to go through this process each year. But it was his success that led to the ability of people to get the benefits in the time they needed and those sorts of things. So seeing that motivated him in his other tasks. So that would be the art of storytelling and the importance of that, and recognizing the success of what they did to help do their part to implement that change.
Sure. I was just going to mix it up.
Go for it.
All right, I'm mixing it up. I think a lot about storytelling. I come at this work from a human-centered design perspective. That's my background. And so something I've reflected on over the course of the past years at UW, but then years at UC Santa Cruz, and then coming back here as well, is that when it comes to storytelling, sometimes I think there's a pretty big difference for changes that we have to make versus changes that someone would like to make. So, and I think the example that you shared, and there are others that maybe have to do with security changes or other things that are compliance changes, et cetera, that the way that we tell stories there, when it's something, a change that we really have to make, how we make it, the way we go about it is different. But sometimes when we confuse that and we're trying to kind of tell a story about something, we're going to do this, that we are going to make this change. It's no matter how we're going to approach the change and hopefully make it as understandable and straightforward for folks, but not necessarily tell a story that's convincing people about a change that we're going to have to make. Do you know what I mean? Like if you spent time when you have urgency, maybe convincing folks of a change that's really, it's a decision has been made, I think that changes the nature of the storytelling. Whereas like I had come into an environment at UC Santa Cruz where the CIO at the time just wanted to remodel the entire IT organization and had transitioned from service management to product management and wanted to change everything about the organization, the culture, the people, the, tools, our processes, just wanted the wholesale, like rip it out and do it again. And he did a lot of storytelling, but to be honest, it was just too much to cover in any one story. And it didn't feel authentic to people. They didn't buy into it. And so even though he was pretty clear, he was certainly very didactic. He repeated the story repeatedly and he would check for knowledge. Do you know the story? Kind of a thing. And I was hired in as a part of that vision for the future at that organization, which is a really tricky position to be in some ways, right? To realize like, oh, I'm kind of the tail end of a change that nobody wanted. And how do you then kind of navigate through that from a storytelling perspective? And I don't know that you can in some ways. That's like another problem to solve in some ways. But I don't know. I just reflect that there are different approaches for the changes that we have to make versus the changes that someone has decided is important for us to make. Right, Dan, it's all yours.
Hey, does anybody remember email migrations? I assume you don't do that shit anymore. Anyway, I was reflecting on the fact that I went through one here and then went through one at University of Illinois prior to that. And it's a great example, in my opinion, of looking at that model of operations versus politics versus culture. And so you can think about now from an IT perspective, we generally are thinking about the operational world, making sure things don't crash, making sure you can't get into the system, whatever. And those are all useful things. But at the end of the day, those won't change the culture and those won't impact politics without some sort of human connection, without some sort of storytelling. And I think that's why stuff like email migrations, HR migrations, stuff like that, are so challenging for IT people on campuses, especially where you have shared governance and all those things, because the perception in terms of how does this affect me, what does this do in terms of our overall culture, those kind of questions are abstract and are difficult to answer. And I think without the ability to humanize your change through storytelling, through talking with individuals, that doesn't happen very well. I remember Bruce Moss telling me that he had to have a one-on-one meeting with some old professor in engineering, in some department. Because the guy was so upset about losing his forwarding rules for email. And it's like, at some point, you have to, I guess, figure out who those influencers are, and sometimes have that one-on-one meeting, even if that's an expensive meeting in terms of your time and your availability, just because that person has a lot of sway in that department. And so, meeting them face to face may do something, even though it has nothing to do with the technology.
We have a question.
Sorry, James McKay, Learning W team. Since we have you all here, one thing, because you've talked a lot about kind of plan change, right? Where it's well known ahead of time. There's a big plan. You do all that. I'm curious what your thoughts are on preparing employees for maybe those unplanned changes or those sudden changes, because you don't have time to sell a narrative or do a lot of that operational planning. So, and maybe there's no strategy for that, but I'm just curious what your thoughts are.
I think you can do some planning. It just has to start really early, and you have to set expectations maybe from the get-go. It's something that our director does with every new hire at the CHDC. He tells them, all right, we are grant funded. Things change frequently on kind of the 5-year basis, but also things change day to day because we also do a lot of operational IT stuff. And so what you come into work, you're working on some big months-long project, there's a fire. You got to deal with that. And so a lot of it is developing everybody's tolerance for change and doing that early and frequently.
I would add to that, being able to talk about the why as much as possible. I know we hear that throughout the day today, but if it's a sudden change, there might be a why, like a policy, a mandate, a federal government change. Is there anything that you can provide that exists outside of the system that's forcing you to do it? I would also say there needs to be a decision point on what you do with resistors, to kind of use maybe some lingo, and depending upon the change, having seen change management through HR, finance, research administration, and IT, different strategies in different areas for resistors. We're going to train more. We're going to have more open conversation about, is this still the right position or not? And so kind of matching your strategy for that with the culture. Because to your point, you have some amount of time to do some planning. Where do you want to focus that?
I hate to bring up our COVID pandemic, but that gave us a really, really good lesson to do exactly what you were talking about, which is how do you shift the culture that quickly, and how many courses that had to get spun up in Canvas, which I know that's probably a 5-letter word right now. How much help we needed to give to faculty who didn't have an online presence or that sort of thing. So the lessons from there really showed, one, that we're much more mature of an organization for those changes. It showed that there was a lot more knowledge within the people who needed to be involved in those changes. So the end users, both the students and the faculty, adapted very quickly to a new environment. And I think IT in general, we're not giving ourselves enough credit for being able to deal with an emergency on that scale, with empathy, consistency, and there's another word I'm missing, I'm sure. But I don't think we give ourselves enough kudos as an organization for how we helped our faculty and students transition off campus and back to campus and still get their work done.
I have one thing I want to add, because I think that the pandemic and other things, there's these like 100-year floods, right? Kind of a thing. And I just think about environmentally, those kind of things that seemed like they were kind of unusually challenging circumstances in our environment are becoming more and more frequent here in our workplace as well. And so I think a lot about how most folks that work in the work that we do can like come together in a crisis. People do that pretty well, I think, in general. I think that when it feels like that's sort of the steady state, at the same time when there are budget cuts or there is reduction, and it feels like, there's all these other things that you're being asked to do more. I mean, that's something that I've spent a lot of time. I came out of an organization that was in the process of a multi-year, really significant budget cut on top of just, a lot of factors that weren't even necessarily bad, but were just really challenging, like the mass unionization of all IT staff at the UC system, for example, and, environmental factors in addition to like the Canvas outage that just happened recently as well. And I do think that as leaders, I think about ways that we can manage the capacity, the level that we're working at. There's a lot of pressure to be more efficient and to take on more work, but I think that there maybe are some levers and dials there to really more meaningfully reduce the volume of work that is our steady state. And maybe that's a space for AI to help. Maybe that's a space where we have to renegotiate timelines and expectations with our partners as well. But given that this is sort of more of our normal state, I just think that the potential for burnout and for mistakes and for things that end up being much more effortful seems to increase. And so are there ways, maybe there's like management ways to really try to reduce workload? And I don't know, that's something I've been thinking about.
And to add on to that, it makes me think of people's tolerance for change for different things can vary very widely. Like we at the CHDC have trained people that, yes, what you work on, who you work with is going to change, but maybe where you're working, that's pretty stable. And like all these different things that are coming at us. One was we moved from the old CS building to this very beautiful new building here. But it was a big cultural change for us. We're 100% in office. Everybody over there had their own office. That was a big change because the space was a premium here. And so people had to start sharing offices. There's kind of a big shared open cubicle space, and people had to change their work environment. And so some people, who are rock stars at dealing with the change that we've been dealt with and trained everybody in as a center, had a lot of trouble with that.
And I think that's also part of the need for empathy and realizing when the change is impacting individuals' experience, where they work, their laptops, the equipment they use, the tools they're being told to use. Those are all changes and can be very personable to an individual. And in corporate speak, sometimes we have the perception that, hey, do as you're told a little bit and suck it up and do it. But even in corporate, they're mindful of those things and the change and those sorts of things. The biggest change I was probably ever involved in is the transition to our first campus-wide multi-factor solution. And so we were impacting how 77,000 people were personally logging into our systems. And so when I took it from that personal approach, I thought it went much better when we had those conversations and we realized it was a change for a person and it wasn't just a new technology to use.
I appreciate all of you talking about, empathy in communication, but also the trust that you need to build within your teams to make sure that you can handle those kinds of changes. I believe is this our time? No? 2:00? Oh, fantastic.
15.
All right. Do we have any? I'm sorry? 2:15. Oh my goodness, we're even better. Okay. Here I was rushing and panicking. All right. Do we have anything from chat any questions real quick? And then no? All right. Fantastic. We have another question from the audience.
Hello, Lisa Burley with the College of Letters and Science. If the cat hasn't been let out of the bag, we are in the process of realigning our IT in the college. And my colleague next to me, Caitlin, we're in a hurry up and wait situation where we know there's big change coming for our group. And if you're Clifton Strengths people, I'm an activator. So I want to start preparing and start doing things. And it's been a challenge. I eventually had to give up on that to some degree. So I don't know if anyone has experience of not being able to it's coming, but you really don't have any power to do anything about it. And if there's any strategy for staying optimistic and motivated as you're waiting to finally get to do something about change.
I'm not really a religious person, but I always come back to the Serenity Prayer It's God grant me the wisdom to, no, God grant me the to accept the things I cannot change, something, and then strength to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. And I found that so helpful when thinking about change generally. And then also managing my own anxiety, because that gives me kind of like the metric is like the acceptance, and then like it's action oriented, and then wisdom to know the difference between the two also helps me think about the different spheres of influence I have, right? Like for your transition, maybe there's nothing you really can do, but you can kind of control your own emotions to some extent, or try and change your mind frame a little bit to hopefully accept the waiting part of it.
The advice I'd give is one, leading to those in the past as well as being led in the past, is that sticking to facts, eliminating rumors, not perpetuating rumors. Other things I would do is I would just write questions in a book, and every time there you go, you do it. So it's writing those questions, and when you have a factual answer it and talk about that with other people. So then you're helping promote the change and hopefully the positive impacts from the change or things that are being dealt with. So that's kind of my advice on that. But you are already doing it, which is great. Yeah.
Go ahead.
As someone who was in the somewhat similar situation of there's a reorg coming so many months in the future, but and you can plan for it and do things and own your current state. And that's not really the case. One of the things that I did that helped me is to try and succeed, to examine who I was, who I had become, and who I wanted to be in this next stage of the change. And while I believe I'm relatively self-aware, it was interesting to take that moment to reflect on the past and who had I become and why, and what kind of environment would I be most successful in the future, so that when the change actually comes and there's decisions to be made for me or that I can make, which ones am I going to make, and which of the difficult decisions am I comfortable making? Where can I say no and feel really good about that as someone who usually says yes all the time? And so that would be my advice in terms of someone experiencing it. When I've had to coach others around this, it is similar. It's learn all that you can, be prepared, be ready for when it happens, try to ultimately stay calm, right? Stay calm and mind the gap, because having too big of reactions at too early doesn't help you or the change or your colleagues. I'm thinking that big W workday thing again. There were a lot of folks that were not involved in the change until closer to the end. So how do you stay engaged with your current role and learn as much as is available about the upcoming change? So.
Such good points. I loved it. So one thing this is like a slightly different take, but builds on something that you'd shared, was the way that organizations handle like big reorganizations or big changes. I've gone through a lot of that in the role that I've just left, many reorganizations. And it's so interesting to think about how much fear there is sometimes and how to involve the people that will be impacted by a change meaningfully in hoping to be a part of articulating what that future might look like. And there's a lot of reasons why, right? Because sometimes it involves things that are hard, eliminating people's positions or really changing things or making you share an office, you know what I mean? Or something, right? That you didn't want to do before. And so, but I do think that there are ways to involve people in the work versus not, and then just sort of delivering the news. And then folks have to kind of absorb it and wonder like, how was this decision made? And often the explanations for why the decisions were made kind of suck. You know what I mean? Even as a leader, when I've had to help other leaders deliver those messages, I'm like, this is insufficient. I know it is, but I'm sorry. This is all that we can tell you about the change right now. So I guess I would just say like more of a possibility and invitation that there are lots of convivial and facilitative ways to involve people in the change as well. Their design sessions or strategies, and not necessarily you design the future of the department, but like help us refine the vision that we've developed, meaningfully refine it. Are there principles you want to make sure that we bring with us as we move forward? I do think that there are opportunities to involve folks without like letting it kind of get totally out of hand. And I just wish organizations had more of those tools and folks maybe like in roles like you were in to help facilitate those conversations, because there really is an opportunity for people to participate. And the more they do, the more you have a chance to be prepared for the change and to be a part of it and to be excited about it, not just told that you will be excited about the change.
Chris.
Yeah, I'm curious. Maybe you could share some thoughts on kind of navigating change on top of change on top of change, right? Maybe we have a change that we know is coming and we're planning for it, and we get into it, and like a bunch of things happen, between now and maybe when you would get to what you feel like is a more stable state. So navigating all of that pivoting and just, your people get like change fatigue, right? It's like, oh, this new thing is changing. So all these plans that we spent all this time on now have to shift, and we don't know what things are going to look like. So I'm kind of curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, change fatigue is a real thing. Thanks for bringing that up, Elizabeth. Anybody want to jump on that one? All right, Sabrina. Oh,
Dan was reaching for the mic.
I've actually been thinking a lot about that in the last couple of days, thinking about this conversation and a couple of things that are happening in my professional life. I don't know, but I would say that, well, let me take a step back. I admire all of you for trying to manage through the kind of changes that we're seeing in IT right now. I can only imagine that you are dealing with a lot of competing forces, a lot of people assuming that because they heard it from an LLM, it's true, and all those kind of things that we didn't really deal with. But at the end of the day, change is constant. I think that the perception that there's some stasis even at a place like university is completely false. But the problem is that you're mostly dealing with individuals who are focused very deeply on a specific thing and want that to not be interrupted. I don't know. I don't have any answers for you, except perhaps to take a step back and think about the fact that nothing, like the fact that things are changing hasn't changed. The rate of acceleration, I think, is different. But what were you doing 3 years ago? What were you doing last year? I could almost guarantee that you're not doing the same kinds of things anymore. And I don't know. I don't have an answer for you, I guess. Just ponderings.
I'd like to agree. I hope the panel can help me with my problem of having way too many unfinished projects.
no.
Sorry. But I think this is something that I try to instill in my team, that they know that operationally, especially this past month with all the Linux kernel vulnerabilities, we run a lot of Linux stuff. Every week, every day, it feels like there's a new vulnerability, and so every single project had to be shelved. And so I've had conversations with my team over the years to make sure that that your day or your project can be interrupted at any given time. So it's really important to kind of save state, little checkpoints, keep notes, and these notes are great for future you, or maybe future you won't be able to pick this up. It'll be really helpful for your teammates. And like, just think about what you would like to have from your teammate when like the baton needs to be passed. But dealing with the fire hose, I don't really have a good solution. I'm sorry.
I'm going to throw something in for you too. I'm not on the panel, but I play like one on TV. So the thing that keeps me sane, having two kids that are now in college and all the changes that happened and work challenges and all those sorts of things is finding that one centering point. We have anchors in our lives that might not be at work, but they can still provide a point of reference for you to anchor yourself, reflect, make sure that you're not just drinking from the fire hose constantly throughout your entire work life. So that's my 2 cents there. Now I'm done.
I'll throw another 2 cents on the table. I'll see you that. So we're up to 4. A couple of things I responded when you had said when you have to scrap plans, and that reminded me of building a foundation under the constant changes. And if you don't have the foundation in place, you can still put it in place. And I would say the two big pieces are comfort with iteration and being iterative. It's not fundamentally bad or wrong if we change the plan. We work at a learning institution. I'll use the word, I'm sorry, I'm shooting on us. We lifelong learners. And so things inevitably change as we know more, as we experience more. So building that foundation of iterating from where we started, that's not fundamentally bad. Not to say that people won't have really strong reactions and feelings to it. And that's another skill that we can build up, is having that empathy and being able to talk to folks about, what does it feel like? What are you experiencing? Are you still able to be productive? Do you need time away when we're iterating? So that's one big foundational piece. But I also think prioritization, and I know that's its own weird jargony word, and we have lots of models, but again, all coming to an understanding that if we are prioritizing, then the thing that we're working on now really is going to help the mission of our unit or of our university. It's aligning with the vision. It's aligning the work that we do every day on the ground with what's going to make this university a better place to be. And priorities should shift. I'm shooting again. As we understand what's best for the greater good, something could be deprioritized. And we all are kind of craving for that no. And in reality, prioritization is not now. So maybe we're doing project A this month, and the next month, because there's vulnerabilities, because there's whatever happening that disrupts our operations, it's going to disrupt our project portfolio as well. And being comfortable saying, okay, now it's project B, we'll come back to A, and we're going to iterate because things look really different now, 60 days out. And oh my gosh, yes, we need to prioritize maybe faster than quarterly, even though that may be what the body of knowledge tells us to do. So putting foundation in place if it's not there, and getting us as comfortable with some of the aspects of change.
And I think with that foundation needs to be a maturity of decision making. And we need to work and raise decisions. And I'm sure my teams got really mad at me at one point because I loved my decision documents. Why are we going to do something? I don't know. Give me the decisions on what would you recommend doing? What are our options? And a lot of times the options was, stop the project because something else came up, or delay the project until we can get this other thing figured out. I mentioned the multi-factor authentication duo project from a number of years ago. It got delayed a month, or we didn't pause the project, but we paused the timeline because someone asked a very important question, which is, what do we do with people who are differently abled, and how to use a different form factor for authentication? And if they didn't say that, if we didn't take the time to figure that out and delay that project and that change just slightly, then we would have impeded on a number of people and the work they do, as well as their confidence in working at the university. So that's where the decision-making and having decision-making built into our processes. The other thing quickly to share is, long time ago, our CIO set a bunch of us down, and we did what our strategic initiatives were. 27 of them. Wow. 27, and that was cut down. And then we talked about how to prioritize those 27, and we couldn't do it. So we had to talk more about the initiative at the high level. I was really glad that the first initiative was not my lovely cybersecurity, which I was glad it wasn't. It was actually our learning management systems. because that's where the mission that was. So I think that goes into decision making as well of what are the changes that have the greatest impact to our overall mission.
Anybody else have anything they'd like to ask right away? No? Anything from chat? We're good? Awesome. Aha! I'm coming. I had knee surgery. I'm just walk a little slow.
I have a follow-up question on the decision-making document. Would you mind sharing what tools you use or what your decision-making documentation sort of looks like? So whenever, for example, someone might suggest you make a change, how do you work through, and this can be for everyone too, this longer part, the second part, how do you work through whether the change should be made, and especially in a way where your team can feel included, the person who made the suggestion can feel heard. Thank you.
Now I have to dig back in my mind a little bit on what that decision document looked like. Tamara Walker and I are the ones who were really kind of pushing at the time, and this is a decade ago. The framework really was identifying the question that was being addressed. So what sort of system should we go with? Then identifying the criteria we were using to make that decision. And then the 3 or 4 options that we really try to stick 3 to 5 options then with the final recommendation. And this was a document that was put together by usually the people on the project team. So we were looking for their input. We'd vet those documents with key stakeholders. And then Tamara and I would take that to the leadership above us to say, this is what's being recommended. And then we would ask for the executive leadership to make the determination on which option. Now, there was some back and forth in that, of course, and there should be, but that was the general model. There's on the legal side, there's a tool called IRAC. And what that replace in that model, the rules with the options. But what that does is, what's the legal question? What are the facts of the case? What are the laws? And then what are the observations? So.
The second part of your question, in terms of how do you make people feel heard, in leadership, I think one of the things that you can do is to use the position that you have in terms of the perception that you're a leader or the perception that you have power, and meet face to face with people. Again, it kind of goes back to like Bruce Moss taking an hour out of his day that he didn't have to sit down with this one leader. Same thing with numerous meetings I would have with like department chairs or individual faculty or researchers or whatever. I think even if you can't provide answers, or especially if you can't provide answers, but you are willing to sit down and just have that face to face, people feel heard. People feel that they have given their input, and even if they don't like the answer, they at least walk away with some satisfaction that they've talked to someone who cares and someone who has an influence and someone who has power. And I think at the end of the day, that actually does make a big difference for people. And then that gets reflected out to the people that they influence.
Thank you for that. So really building trust seems to be the kind of key theme that we're talking about when we're talking about change. Is everybody here during their conversations has talked about making sure that you have that foundation, that trust, that empathy that you're communicating with your teams. measuring success is always something that kind of comes up as well, especially when we're talking about changes. So the last thing that I'm going to ask, and this is the one that I didn't get to ask last time, and so I'm excited about this. How do you measure for success of a change outside of the dreaded word metric and KPIs and all those fun things? What do you count as a success when you're through that change process already?
I think part of it is talking to your people and seeing what they thought about how things went. The answer's in the room, right? So talking to them, talking to your users, getting human feedback really, I think is super important and maybe not always in the metrics.
I think I have kind of a front end consideration, which is that a lot of times when we formulate our KPIs or our metrics for a change, they tend to be functional factors, right? Like, and functional, I mean, it could be that we did it on time, we migrated on time, or I don't know, we did it with a certain amount of tickets or, you know, something like that. There's some metrics that we measure what we can and what's maybe easy to measure as well. But I think on the front end, if you're able to kind of really get clear on what the change will be like for the people at the end of the day, both for our customers, our clients, but also for the team members as well. Like, what's it going to be like once we get through this transition to the other side? I think it's really helpful. That's a place to engage people as well. You're on your team to kind of understand, like, what would that look like for you? It's a chance to surface maybe some of the fears and concerns folks have. But also then in the end, you can kind of say, was it better or worse than that? And one of the things I think is really interesting, and it has a name, I can't remember what it is, but we have kind of a bias that like, once we're done with something, that there can be this like, oh, I thought that was going to be totally easy. Like if it went well, people will be like that. I thought that was going to be no problem. But you're like, no, a few weeks ago, you were like, we're dead, you know, we're doomed, you know, and you're like, what? You've already forgotten that you were the doomsdayer because it went well, and vice versa. If something goes poorly, people in the beginning who said that they thought it was going to go well will claim that they thought it was a terrible idea anyway. And so sometimes it's helpful to have those kind of artifacts that you can look at and say, like, we agreed ish that we thought it was going to be kind of like this, and be pleasantly surprised if it isn't, right? That's an opportunity to learn, but it kind of helps you kind of position the past with the future as well, and to track that transition as well too. So I don't know, I think developing more human informed metrics in addition to those kind of mechanical ones can be a helpful way of understanding, like, was this change successful or not? So
in a way, building on that, measuring how long it's going to take to adapt to the change. We often want these success metrics. How do we prove in numbers or words that what we did worked, and it did what we said it was going to do, even if it was hard or difficult, but that it worked? Well, there's like the time it takes to actually make it work after it's done. And so if we can measure, okay, well, by talking to our peer institutions, a change like this really took about 12 months before people felt confident in their new roles, confident with their skill sets. They've built up what they need to do. You know, job changes, role changes, responsibilities have settled. So kind of understanding how long it's going to take us to actually be successful when the thing is done, and understanding both of them as not necessarily the same thing can be helpful as well.
I'll bring an example that is going to build on Phyllis and Sabrina's comments, which is, at the end of the day, I think it is easy to just check the checkbox and say we're done with this change. But if you go back and look, why did we make this change? And then did that outcome actually happen? I'm going to give you a fun example, telepresence. So we accomplished that, you know, was done on campus. We checked the checkbox. Everything was physically running, you know, people were able to use these rooms, et cetera. But then the question is, why were we doing this? And the answer ostensibly was to expand our impact on the world and be able to talk to other individuals and have virtualized conferences and all those kinds of things. That didn't happen. From a technical perspective, complete success, but actually like why it was done and can you tell that story at the end? I'll leave it to you to judge.
The examples I talked through gave very, very general. I wouldn't even say they were KPIs, but the scope of impact, the scope of the impact. And it's not always about the number of people. It might be about the number of research dollars it brought in, or the type of research that's being done. And the type of research being done might only impact 15 people in whatever effort you just had, but made a difference to those 15 people. So whatever that change is, it's realizing what that impact at the end was to one or more people. If you could tell that story, that goes back to that storytelling element of saying what success is. I like what Dan just said. From an IT side, we can check boxes and it looks great on a email migration, but if people aren't able to use email, or if they're confused or they're mad about it, or there's talking about how awful it is, then yeah, that you might need to go back and do an after action on, what did we miss where people's perceptions or expectations didn't align with what the desired outcomes of that change or that project was.
Thank you all very much. So we also want to thank all of you for participating, but also hearing the stories that our wonderful panel had to share with us. I hope that everybody got something from what they said. I know every time that I have a chance to talk to these folks, I get new nuggets and get more inspired to continue my leadership journey and continue on as well. One of the things that we like to do within ITLD is make sure that we have time for pluses and deltas. And so if there's anything that you would like to share with us about what went well today, or what we could improve for another opportunity, we would love to have you give us that feedback. Is there anything else that you would like to share, Elizabeth?
Do I need a mic to say no? What he said is very true. If you have feedback, we definitely want to hear it. If there were things about this that were really great, if there were technical issues, if there were slide editing issues, which I did notice one on the way through. But all of those things, we want to hear from you. We want to hear about things that you want to hear about. And like I said, we're winging it a little bit this year. So if there are topics that you're interested in, reach out to us, let us know. And we are partnering with a lot of groups across campus to try and bring opportunities to learn from each other. And so thank you all for coming and spending an hour with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.